This conference will now be recorded.
In today's session, we'll try to understand one more resource meta argument that is depends on. So what is this meta argument, right? Depends on meta argument. We'll try to understand. So using Terraform, we are creating a resources, right? When we are creating one resource, there might be another resource which is required to be created along with this resource. So using Terraform, you are creating a resources, right? So using this Terraform, we are creating multiple resources. Like using one resource, using Terraform, you are creating multiple resources. But there might be some use case where you need to create resource one before creating the resource two. You need to create one resource before creating another resource. Just to give an example, let's take you are creating a VPC using Terraform. Let's say you are creating a VPC using Terraform, and within the VPC, you are trying to create a subnets. Let's consider this use case. Using Terraform, you are trying to create a subnet. But before creating a subnet, right? Before creating a subnet, you should have a what you guys know already the AWS VPC concept. So you are creating subnet, right? Using Terraform, you are creating a subnet. Not only just Terraform, understand in general, you are creating a subnetwork. But to create a subnetwork, is the subnet is depends on VPC first. This subnet is depends on VPC, right? This subnet is having a dependency on the VPC. So in Terraform also you are creating multiple resources. In Terraform also you are creating a multiple resources. Maybe one resource might be depend on another resource, but Terraform has a capability to find the dependencies, implicit dependencies. Terraform has a capability to identify the implicit dependencies. Implicit dependencies. What do you mean by implicit dependencies? When you are creating a resources using Terraform, you might be referring other resource IDs. You might be referring other resource IDs using its local name. Using its local name, you might be referring other resources. Implicit dependencies. Implicit dependencies are automatically inferred. Implicit dependencies are automatically inferred by Terraform when a resource or module access the data of the other resource or module. Just to give an example, in the last class also, in the 3-4 sessions back, what we have done, we created a S3 bucket. We created a S3 bucket, and the bucket name, the bucket name, the bucket name. What we have done, instead of hard coding the bucket name, we used one more resource to generate the random name, and we are accessing that resource data in the S3 resource block. Did you guys remember that concept? So we have written a code like this. We have written a code like this. In the 3-4 sessions back, what we have done, we created a resources. We created a resources like this. Resource, we created a resource like this. Resource AWS S3 bucket, and we created a bucket. This is local name. This is local name. Here we have given bucket something like this, some random name, right? Mithun Tech S3 bucket, and we have given some random name. How we are giving random name? We used one more provider. We used one more provider, right? We used one more provider, that is random. There is something called random pet provider, if you guys remember that concept. There is something called random. This random provider we used this provider something like this in our code. Then we are trying to create a resource, one more resource random string, something like this, some local name, random s3 something. So what we have done, we have defined some attributes here, right? We have this no we have given some attributes, right? Lower, upper, lower, like this. Upper I have made it false, so I need lower. And we have used something, how many length I have given 16 like this, and the special characters false I have told something like this. And what we have done, we are referencing this resource data. We are referencing this resource data here, right? If you guys remember, we are referencing something like this, right? The resource type that the local name that id, like that we referred. Now since we are accessing some other resource information here, since we are accessing some other resource information, other resource data, so Terraform is able to identify the dependencies implicitly. Implicit dependencies are automatically inferred by Terraform when a resource or a module access the data of the another resource. So here, one resource, this resource is accessing the data of the another resource. Now, Terraform is able to identify the dependencies. Automatically, it will identify the implicit dependencies since we are referring like this. This is the default behavior, implicit dependencies. Now, Terraform knows that. Since Terraform knows that this resource has to be created before creating this resource, as this resource information is being referred here. So now, is this resource become dependency for this resource? Yes. This is called as an implicit dependency. Even though you are defining in a different order also, I mean to say, here you are defining, does Terraform creates this resource first before creating this resource, because this is being referred another, this resource is referring another resource data. Is it going to create this one first? Because this is a dependency for this resource. This is called as an implicit dependency. Terraform, we discussed all this already. Resource behavior. In the resource behavior, we already discussed. In the previous sessions. So resource dependency. We discussed already, right? However, some resources must be processed after other specific resources. Sometimes this is because of how the resource works. Sometimes the resource configuration depends on another resource information. Sometimes resource configuration requires information generated by another resource. Sometimes resource configuration just requires information generated by other resources. Most of the resource dependencies are handled automatically. Most of the resource dependencies are handled automatically. Terraform analysis, any expressions in the sense that arguments. Terraform analysis any expressions. This is like expressions, right? This is like an expression. We are accessing them some data. So this is like a expression. So Terraform will analyze any expressions within the resource block to find the referencing to other objects, and it will treat those references as a implicit requirements when creating or updating or destroying. Since most resources with the behavioral dependencies on other resources, so these resources will be implicit dependencies. Something you are referring like this. So Terraform will automatically identify the dependencies, implicit dependencies, and it will create. But in some scenarios, you are not referencing the resources information in another resource. That time you can explicitly specify the dependencies using this depends on meta argument. However, some dependencies cannot be recognized implicitly in a configuration because you are not referencing one resource information in another resource information. In some scenarios, the dependencies cannot be recognized implicitly in configuration. So Terraform must manage. We can inform the Terraform saying that this resource depends on another resource explicitly. That we call it as a explicit dependencies. You can use this meta argument called depends on to specify the explicit dependencies. Now here, even though we are not specifying depends, the Terraform knows that which resource has to be created first, right? Let me show that. Let me go to this folder. Where I have this code. Let me go to the folder. Where I have this Terraform, right? Code. Let me open in a terminal. Now I will do something like this: Terraform init to initialize the required providers. Now I will say Terraform plan. I'll say Terraform plan like that. Now it will try to show what resources has to be created or destroyed or updated like that. If you see, it is able to identify the dependencies. When we are applying, it knows that what resource has to be created first because of the implicit dependency. It knows that what has to be created. Now if you see, it is creating a random string first. Before creating a S3 bucket. How come it knows that? Even though in the order I have given random string later, S3 bucket first, how come Terraform knows that this has to be created before creating this one? Because of reference. It's referenced. This is called as implicit dependencies. This we call it as implicit dependencies. Terraform will be able to identify the implicit dependencies if one resource or module information is referred in another resource or module. Terraform will be able to identify the implicit dependencies. Is everyone clear? First of all, what is dependency and what is implicit dependency before I explain that it depends on attribute? Not only here, suppose you are creating a S3 bucket. Sorry, suppose you are creating a VPC, you are creating a subnet. Suppose you are creating a VPC, you are creating a subnet. That time also you can specify. I'll come to that. I'll come to that. We will create a VPC subnets today using Terraform. I'll come to that. When you are writing a Terraform code, you are creating a VPC, you are creating a subnet. Inside the subnet, you will refer the VPC ID. Inside the subnet, you will refer the VPC ID. So does Terraform will knows the Terraform will identify that? So VPC has to be created first before creating a subnet, because subnet within the subnet resource we are accessing or we are referring VPC resource data. So that is also kind of an implicit dependency. That is also kind of an implicit dependency. We will create a VPC in some time, but is everyone clear what do you mean by implicit dependency? What is dependency and what do you mean by implicit? Terraform will be able to identify the dependencies of the resources automatically. If some resource or module information is being referred in another resource or module, so that it will be able to identify automatically. But in some scenarios, you may not have a implicit dependencies. You are not referring, but you can specify the explicit dependencies using depends on argument. Let me destroy this and I'll demonstrate other one. Let me destroy whatever has been created. Let me destroy whatever has been created. Now, if you see, while destroying also, is it first destroying S3 before it is destroying that random string? While creating, this is created first. That is how dependencies will work, right? While creating, this is created first, this is created later. While destroying, this is destroyed first, then it is destroyed like that. So that is how the dependencies works, right? Implicit dependencies. Now, let's take this use case. Let's take this use case. I'm creating, just to give an example, I'm creating one AWS instance. I deleted everything, the code, or let me create a new folder. Let me create a new folder to understand this concept. New code to understand this concept. Let's create a new project itself like that in Terraform. Let me create a folder. Depends on meta arg. So let's open this in the Visual Studio Code. I'll write a new code for sharing with you guys to understand that concept. Let me write this code in this, let me use this depends on folder. Now let me create a file. Here I'm just saying main.tf, and if required, you can have a separate file where you can provide your Terraform configurations. That is a best practice. In a separate file, you can define Terraform configurations and provider configurations. In another file, you can have a resource configurations that we already discussed. That is how it works. If required, you can define something like this also, Terraform block, required providers. I'm saying AWS provider. Guys, you just copy paste everything. You no need to worry, right? If you go to how to use that provider, you go to Terraform registry, you see documentation, how to use that provider. You can use this provider. Since I am using AWS provider, I need to configure the providers also. So there I am going to mention, like for connecting with for authentication with AWS. I have configured a AWS CLI using this profile. I created a profile. I am using that profile under region. I'll say AP South 1 like that. This is provider. Now let's say I am going to create some resources. Resource. Okay, that is fine. Resource AWS underscore instance. AWS underscore instance demo server like that. Now I am trying to create an AWS instance using some AMI ID. Using some AMI ID, I am creating an instance. I am defining instance type like this t2.micro, t2.micro. Now I am going to give some tags, right? And I am going to specify the AMI ID. Let me get the AMI ID from that region. Whatever AMI ID you want to use. I'm taking the Red Hat AMI ID. I'm taking the Red Hat AMI ID. This AMI ID, Red Hat AMI in that region. Now let's say I'm trying to create a one more resource. I'm trying to create a one more resource. AWS. Just to give an example, S3 bucket. Local name to that resource. And you are giving that bucket name. Guys, all the options for this you can check in the documentation. Okay, you can go to this provider documentation. You can see there is a resource AWS underscore S3 underscore bucket like that. AWS underscore S3 underscore bucket. This resource. So I'm just defining out all these options. Bucket name. I'm giving something like this. Bucket name. I'm giving something like this. Now I'm giving something like this. Something like this. Now this is my bucket I'm trying to create. Something like this. Now if you want to enable ACL, access control list, right? We have defined that access control list AWS S3 ACL. This is one more resource. So we can create an access control list. Using Terraform. Access control list. You can specify access control list something like this. Access control policies also you can specify. Access control list. Now if I'm creating this resource access control list also, in that I am referring the bucket ID. So for this resource, this is considered as a dependency, that is implicit dependency. For this resource, this is considered as a implicit dependency. Let's say I'm trying to create a access control list for that S3 bucket. This is another resource. Now here I am referencing like this S3 bucket dot the local name dot ID like this. Now does Terraform will know that this resource is a dependent for this resource, which means there is a dependency. Before creating this resource, Terraform knows that this has to be created because we are referencing here. This is called as implicit dependency. This is called as implicit dependency. But some scenarios you may need to specify explicit dependencies. Just to give an example, before creating this AWS instance, I want to have this S3 resource, S3 bucket created. I want to have a S3 bucket created. But here we are not referencing. This is in AWS instance, we can't refer S3 bucket because S3 bucket is not an argument for EC2 instance, but I have a requirement. Before creating this AWS instance, I want this S3 bucket to be created like that. But here, can we define using arguments or expressions, because there is no way this AWS instance arguments will accept the S3 bucket as an input. But in that case, if you have such type of requirements, you can't define implicitly, because you are not referencing. Can we use that meta argument called depends on meta argument? Here, depends on meta argument like this. So if I say something like this, what Terraform does? I'm saying depends on, this is meta argument, and what is its depends on? Now I am giving the resource type dot resource local name. So due to this, what Terraform does, guys? Now what Terraform does? Terraform will first create this resource before creating this resource. Even though you define in a different order doesn't matter. Even though you are defining like this, it knows, it will able to identify implicit dependencies and explicit dependencies like that. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by this depends on meta argument? This depends on meta argument. We can specify the hidden dependencies. So using depends on meta argument, we can use the depends on meta argument to handle hidden resources or modules dependencies that Terraform cannot automatically infer. You only need to explicitly specify a dependency when resource or modules relies on another resource behavior, but it does not access any of resource data in its arguments. You can use this depends on meta argument. Something like this. Depends on meta argument. You can specify something like, they have given some other example. Here. So they are saying before creating this AWS instance, create something like this. They are saying this is depends on this resource like that. They are saying. Now here I am I am explaining with another resource only. Is everyone clear? What is this depends on meta argument? This is external dependency. I mean to say explicit dependencies. This is how you can define explicit dependencies which cannot be inferred by Terraform automatically. Is everyone clear before I run this? Is everyone clear? What is this depends on? Now let's run this. Now if you specify like this, this will be created, this S3 bucket will be created first. Guys, wherever you see this array, you need to have a basics of programmatic. Wherever you see square bracket, in the this is like in the JSON format only. Wherever you see square bracket, right, it is like a array or list, we can call it, because one resource might be depends on multiple resources, right? One resource might be depends on multiple resources. That is again explicit dependencies. You can give all those things as a comma separated. Yes, it's a list where you can define comma separated multiple explicit dependencies. Suppose you want to create one IAM user. Before creating this AWS instance also. Before creating this AWS instance, you want to create one IAM user. You can refer that one also here as a depends on, that is explicit dependencies. Now I don't have better readability here because this is not formatted. What command we can use? Just to recap the commands. Let me go to that folder. Depends on meta. I'll execute Terraform format fmt. Now if you see, it is formatted like this. Now Terraform init, because this is a new folder, new module. I'm executing Terraform init. It will initialize the required backend. It is going to download the required provider plugins, whatever I am using. AWS provider I am using, it is downloading that provider plugin. It is going to create that dependency, that lock file, for that provider. Now let me execute Terraform plan. Now it is saying these many resources has to be created like that. These many resources has to be created like that. So server will be created like this. Server will be created like this, and S3 bucket also will be created like this, and that one more resource ACL like this. 3 resources to add. Now, since we have explicitly specified this as AWS instance, this resource is depends on this one. When I apply, let's see how it works. When I apply, let's see how it works. Terraform, apply. If you want to say auto approve, you can use auto approve. Auto approve. Otherwise, you need to give a confirmation. Yes, like that. Let me use auto approve. If you see, is first S3 bucket is getting created because in the AWS instance resource, I specified that depends on this resource. Is S3 bucket is getting created first. And for this ACL S3 bucket is ACL, for this ACL resource S3 bucket is implicit dependency. But for this AWS EC2 instance, this is like an explicit dependency. I have only specified. So is everyone clear? What is this? Depends on meta argument. If you see, it is created like this. Even though in my resource, if this is created later, if this is defined first also, that doesn't matter. It will find the dependencies, implicit dependencies automatically. If required, you can use this depends on to specify explicit dependencies or hidden dependencies like that. Let's just try this. Once our practice is done, because I don't want to have any resources. Guys, since I'm explaining the concept, I'm creating and destroying, but in real time, is it like since I have explained like this, whatever infrastructure you created using Terraform apply, are you going to destroy immediately? No. Why I am destroying? To avoid the charges here. To avoid the charges here. I am just destroying. But when you really want to destroy, you don't need those resources anymore. You can destroy. Okay. Now we discussed about meta arguments. What is this? Depends on count for each provider life cycle. This provisioner I will discuss in a separate session. There is a provisioner for taking some extra actions after resource is created. You can run some kind of a scripts locally in the Terraform machine or remotely in that instance where we have on which it is created. You can take some actions after resource is created. I will take this provisioners in a separate session. But is everyone clear? Other meta arguments, what is meta arguments and what are these meta arguments? From last 3 days we were discussing count for each provider life cycle depends on, but you can use all these things based on your requirement. For same resource you can use count or for each, not both. And you can use this provider meta argument, you can use this life cycle meta argument also based on your requirement. Since I have explained one after the other, you might be thinking you can't use all these things for a single resource. Don't take that way. Can I use something like this? Count like 2. This is also meta argument. If required, can I use this life cycle also? Something like this. Create before destroy. You might be thinking, since I have explained one after the other, you might be thinking only one can be used like that. No. Based on your requirement, you can use all these things. And here also, if you want to prevent the destroy, you can say prevent destroy also. Suppose you want to ignore some changes, whatever you have done manually, ignore changes, right? Something like this. Something like this. You can use all these things. But only these two cannot be used together. These two cannot be used together. These two cannot be used together. For each and count. But rest of the meta arguments can be used. I hope you are clear. What is meta argument? What is what? Now let's get into some one use case. I'll take a use case. I'll take a requirement now. I'll take a requirement now. Now let's take one requirement, the real requirement. Now my requirement is, this is my requirement. Let me tell you. This is my requirement. In my AWS account, we discussed about so much of Terraform concepts, right? So many Terraform concepts we discussed. Let's apply that knowledge now. Let's apply that knowledge. Now, let's apply that knowledge. Now in this AWS account, in Mumbai region or any other region, whatever region. Guys, this is one task now, the actual task which we need to do using Terraform. Now using Terraform, I want to create some resources. Now using Terraform, I want to create some resources. Let's say in AP South 1, that is Mumbai region, I want to have this architecture. I need to create a VPC. I need to create a VPC. Something like this. Let's take some CIDR. Let's take some CIDR. I am taking 192.168.0.0.0/24, and this VPC should have some subnets. It should have some subnets. It should have some subnets. Now I am planning subnets like this. I'm planning subnets like this. I'm planning subnet like this. In one of the availability zone, in this availability zone, 2 subnets. In another availability zone, I'm planning 2 subnets, like one public subnet, one private subnet, one public subnet here, one private subnet here, one private subnet here. Similarly, Similarly here in another availability zone also, in another availability zone also, here one private subnet, one private subnet, one public subnet. The name will not become public and private. We know already the concept of AWS VPC. The names doesn't matter here. The names doesn't matter. How that subnet becomes public, how that subnet becomes private, that depends on what? VPC concept, right? How to make any subnet as a public subnet, how to make any subnet as a private subnet? Internet gateway. Guys, NAT is not mandatory. NAT is not mandatory. Internet gateway is required. So I need to create a VPC with required resources, components. Internet gateway. Internet gateway. So IGW. This VPC requires IGW. Now, if I want to make any subnets as a public subnet, what needs to be created? The VPC components. How can I, excuse me, how can I make these two subnets as public subnet? If I just have a VPC, does it become public? If I just have a VPC with IGW, does it mean these subnets are public subnets like that? What needs to be created? VPC concept, guys. Route table. Route table. You need to create a route table. You need to create a route table. You need to create a route table, right? Route table. You need to create a route table for that VPC. By default, default route table will be there. You no need to worry. Main route table. There is something called main route table. Yes, like that. Main route table. In main route table, by default it will come. In main route table, you have something like this. That VPC range, CIDR range 192.168.0.0.0/24. The target will be local like that. You will have. This is the main route table. But now I want to make these subnets as a public subnets. These two as a public subnet. Do I need to create a one more route table? Do we need to create a one more route table? Something like this. Any name that doesn't matter. Do we need to create a route table? And do we need to add the routes? Do we need to add the routes? Something like this. We guys already learned AWS, right? I hope you can understand. I need to specify. And if I just create a route table with routes, if I just create a route table with routes, is this subnets will be associated to this route table? Automatically no. What we need to do after adding the routes? We need to associate. We need to associate. It is like association you need to do. So you need to associate. That we call it as a subnet association. We call that as a subnet association. You need to associate those subnets to this route table. You need to add these two subnets. You need to associate these two subnets in this route table. This guy become a public. Now these are private, but I have a requirement. The private subnets, the servers in a private subnets need access to the internet. Then what else needs to be created again? Suppose these servers in the private subnet need access to the internet. What we need to create again? If that is the use case, you need to create a NAT. You need to create a NAT instance. 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 Now you need to create a NAT instance, NAT gateway. But that NAT gateway has to be created where? The NAT gateway has to be created under which subnet? That can be in public subnet. that will be in a public subnet, that NAT gateway. That can be, if required, you can create a two NAT gateways also. One NAT gateway in this subnet, another NAT gateway in another subnet, another public subnet. And this private subnet can be associated with this NAT gateway in one route table. This private subnet can be associated with this NAT gateway in another route table also if required. It is not like only one NAT. If required, you can do like this also. But if this subnet has to be associated with this NAT gateway, if this subnet has to be associated with this NAT gateway, then how many route tables we need to create? Two separate route tables. But if both subnets needs to be associated with single NAT instance, then can I do in a single route table also? The way we have done, yes. But most of the cases you will do like this. Most of the cases you will do like this to avoid the congestion, network latencies, because this subnet in one availability zone has to contact a NAT in another availability zone again to access the data. Do have some kind of a latency again? If this subnet private servers are contacting this NAT gateway, you have some latencies because this is in a different data center, this is in a different data center. To avoid that, you can plan like this also. This is AWS concept, guys. This is AWS concept. Now, in that case, I need to create a two route tables for associating those NAT instances. Here I can say in one of the, I can say NAT1 something, just this NAT gateway, and I can associate this subnet here. I can associate this subnet here, this subnet with this NAT, and here one more NAT instance here, and this subnet can be associated with this route table like this, private route. Suppose if you don't want to do like this, you can create a single NAT instance and single route table where you can associate both. That is also fine. But most of the cases you will do like this. Now this is my requirement. This is my requirement. This is my requirement. This is what the actual task you need to do. Can I do it this manually using GUI? Can I do this manually using GUI? Yes, nothing will stop you. But if it is a manual process, using GUI, is it going to take lot of time? Manually creating, lot of time. And is it going to lead to the human errors? You are doing some mistake. You are missing. Suppose you are not creating an NAT gateway and you are not associating with this route table like that. Will it lead that to human errors if you are manually building this infrastructure? Understand the Terraform benefits. Now, if I can do manually all these things, right? I can go to AWS console, I can create a VPC, subnets, route tables, NAT instances. It will take a lot of time, first one, and there is no automation. Is there any reusability? If you are manually doing, you want to replicate same infrastructure again multiple times. Can you reuse whatever you have done manually, right? There is no code, there is no automation. There. You can't reuse whatever you have already done. It is like again rework. And again, since you are doing manually, will it lead to some inconsistencies, human errors? As a human, you may do some mistake. Suppose you forgot to do this NAT instance creation. Will it lead to some kind of an inconsistency? Yes. Even though you create a NAT instance, you forgot to create a route subnet association. Will it lead to some kind of a human errors and inconsistencies in your infrastructure? The benefits of Terraform, whatever we discussed, yes. So if I go with infrastructure as a code, you are going to define all your infrastructure resources. That can be a servers, that can be a networks, load balancers, whatever it is. As a code, you can reuse that code. You can do some kind of automation. You can reproduce or recreate a consistent infrastructure, consistent environments. all the Terraform benefits, right? Now Terraform, can I use the Terraform to create this infrastructure kind of a networking as per my requirement, networking infrastructure with required subnets, route tables, NAT instances using Terraform? Yes. Now let's get into the implementation. Let's get into the implementation. Kind of a, so far we learned simple things. So far we learned simple things, bits and pieces, right? Provider block, resource block, only one or two resources we have created. Now we are going to create a more resources. Now let me create one folder. Let me create one folder. One second. VPC demo. Now I'll write a file, Terraform file. I'll write a Terraform file. Let me write everything in a single. Later we will understand the best practices. Now, what provider I need to use now to create these VPC, subnets, route tables, NAT instances? What provider we need to use? What provider we need to use? AWS provider. So how can I define that provider information, that required providers informations like that, required version of the provider, using which block? Using which block? First, I need to define the required providers using what? Terraform block. I need to define the required providers and the Terraform related settings. Terraform related settings and the required providers. I told, right, required providers for the Terraform. Using which block we can define? You guys forgot everything. Huh? Terraform block. You need a Terraform block, right? So you can define Terraform block. Suppose if required, can you specify the version of the Terraform CLI also? You can specify using pessimistic operator like this also. 1 point something, 1.0. There is a difference between 1.0 and 1.3.0. There is a difference between 1.0 and 1.30. Now, if it is this, right, 1.3.0 pessimistic operator, only which number is allowed to increment? The rightmost one. Now my Terraform version is 1.3.9. Is this constraint for the CLI is satisfied if I give like this? Yes. Now let's understand. If I give 1.2.0, is this constraints will be satisfied? If this is the Terraform version I have in my laptop? No. No. Only rightmost number is allowed. But if I do something, is this also satisfied? That can be 1.0.1, 1.0.2, 1.0.3. That can be 1.1.0, 1.1.2, 1.1.3 also, or 1.3.1, 3.1. Now, if I give like this, this is also fine? Yes. Yes. Rightmost number is allowed in the sense, now I have given 1.3, 1.0. Is the rightmost version is 1.3, 1.3, right? After that 3, that can be anything. Is this allowed? 1.3, 1.1, 1.2. That is what we discussed. Rightmost number is allowed. Chandra is saying still no. It is not still no, it is yes. If required, based on your use case, you can specify whatever. Just to explain, let me give 2.0. Let me give 2.0. Now, required providers. I will go to AWS. I no need to worry. I'll go to AWS. There is a detailed documentation. Since I have everything already like this, I'll just copy paste only this. I'll copy paste only this. Guys, if required, can I use multiple providers also to create resources from multiple platforms? The way I am using AWS provider, if required, can I use other providers also? That can be random provider, Google provider, GCP provider, like that, as I already told, yes. Now I'm just using AWS. I'm just using AWS. So this is fine. Now, if I just define like this, it will not work. Some providers needs provider configuration. Some providers need a configuration for that provider. Provider related configurations you need to do. Where you can, what block you can use to configure the required providers now? The provider configurations like access key, secret key, access key, secret key. In which region? That is using provider. Using provider block, AWS provider, AWS provider. Now region. This is what most widely used. Region, region. This is what we most widely used. Now my requirement says AP South 1, that is Mumbai. Can I say that a technical term like AP South 1 region? But this provider has to be authenticated with the AWS, right? This HashiCorp AWS provider has to authenticate with AWS. There are many ways to authenticate. We discussed all those things. What you can do, you can define your access key, you can define your secret key. Guys, I am explaining all the concepts, whatever we discussed, the bits and pieces we learned. I can define access key, I can define secret key, access key, secret key, like this. But it is common that you are going to check in the Terraform configuration, the Terraform code into SCM. Is it a best practice to commit these confidential data into SCM tools? No. Then can I do using environment variables also? Before running this Terraform script, can I set this access key and secret key using environment variables also that we already discussed? Guys, there is a detailed documentation. There is a detailed documentation how to use these providers. The AWS provider, if you see, so you can define like this: authentication, parameters in provider configuration, environment variables, shared credentials file, that profile. These two are related to profile. Otherwise, you are planning to run Terraform from AWS itself. You are planning to run Terraform code from AWS EC2 instance itself. You have some AWS EC2 instance or some any other thing, and you are planning to run this Terraform code from AWS itself. Can I define role, the role related settings here? IAM role concept like that. That is what I told in the beginning. Understand. Now, if this is the case, I can set using role. That is not always true. If required, when I am running this Terraform code in this EC2 instance, that EC2 instance can be Jenkins instance. That EC2 instance can be Jenkins instance. That EC2 instance can be Jenkins instance. I can attach IAM role and I can use that role settings here. Otherwise, can I still in my pipeline before I execute Terraform init or Terraform plan like that, in my Jenkins pipeline, if required, can I set those environment variables also as that access key and secret key also if required as a environment variables in your pipeline? And can you have those details in a Jenkins as a secret Jenkins concept? In Jenkins, can you create some kind of a secret text? And can I create a secret text in Jenkins for that access key and secret key Jenkins concept? And can I refer those secrets in my pipeline? And can I set those as environment variables instead of hard coding in your pipeline also? The Jenkins concept. Yes. So understand the concept. I hope you are clear what I am trying to say. So you set your you create a secret for access key and secret key in Jenkins. In your pipeline, you can refer that secrets in your pipeline and set those secrets as an environment variables again using set. Otherwise, you use role. Otherwise, you use profile, whatever. But without configuring the profile or without configuring the profile or without using the role or without using that access key and secret key in the provider configuration or as a environment variables also you have not set. If you are not doing anything, does Terraform will be able to interact with AWS via that provider? If you are not doing any of these things, no. So whatever works for your case, you do that. But here, this is my local laptop. This is my local laptop. I am Balaji now. Can I use role? Can I attach role to my laptop or desktop like that? No, this is user concept. So can I use access key and secret key? That access key and secret key I can use as an environment variables also I can set. As an environment variables also I can set. I have demonstrated that already. As an environment variables also I can set. Otherwise, can I hard code in my provider configuration? That is not correct. I am not going to hard code. Otherwise, can I configure AWS CLI? Can I create a profile like whatever I have already done? And can I use that profile? Yes, it's up to you. Whatever works for your use case. Now, I am using a profile. I am using a profile because in my local laptop, I already configured the profile. The profile name. If you don't have given a custom profile name, what is the default profile? But the default name it will look. But I have configured my AWS access keys and secret keys using custom profile name. The profile name is Terraform profile like that. I'm using that one. Guys, all these things we already discussed. I'm not explaining anything new. Now I want to create a resource. I want to create a resource. VPC, subnets, route tables. So you go to Terraform documentation. Everything is there here only. The provider documentation. Now if you see, if you scroll down, what AWS provider is providing, what resources is provided by this AWS provider. Here it is a documentation. If you scroll down, there is something called VPC, virtual private cloud. Under this category, there are again resources. Now, can I create a VPC resource type AWS underscore VPC, AWS underscore VPC. This is the resource type. This is the resource type in that provider. Can I create a VPC like this? Just to give an example, I'll modify the code. I'm saying demo VPC like that. CIDR as per my requirement. I'll say 192.168.0.0.0/24. And it will take lot of arguments. What arguments this resource type? Arguments is different, meta arguments is different. What arguments this resource will take, where we can check that argument names and its values or expressions. Guys, where we can check? In the documentation only. Now I can say tags if required. The tags, right? Demo VPC like this. And again, you have lot of options, right? If you guys remember when I explained VPC, I told some other options. Enable DNS host names, enable DNS resolution. Did you guys remember those preferences for AWS VPC? When I create a VPC, you can make some preferences, right? Enable DNS host name, enable DNS resolutions. All those options you can see here, right? CIDR block, default, in that VPC tenancy default or dedicated like that. There is a concept, right? Default, optional. Again, this is optional, but based on your requirement, you can give whether it's a dedicated or default tenancy or dedicated tenancy like that. So now I'm just saying default. The value is default. You can see the values also here. What values we can give for this argument. Now I'm not going to worry about this IPv6. I'm not creating IPv6 CIDR. I'm using normal CIDR only. Now you see there is some option: enable DNS host name, enable DNS support. If you guys remember all these things, DNS resolution, DNS host names. Can I use all these options as per my requirement? Enable DNS support. It's a Boolean value. It's a Boolean value. I can say enable DNS support true, true, and enable DNS resolve that DNS host names. If required, I can say true. Now I created a VPC. I created a VPC with required arguments. Guys, if required, you can use meta arguments. If required, you can use meta arguments, but I don't have that meta arguments use case here. I don't want to use any meta arguments. I'm just using normal argument name. It's a value or expression, we call it. It's a value or expression, we call it. We discussed what is resource block, what is this, what is this, what is this. Now is everyone clear what it is going to do if I do like this? I don't want to do step by step. I don't want to do step by step. Step by step in a sense, if I run Terraform apply, only VPC will be created. Later, if I add some other resources, again, other will be created. I can do step by step also. Otherwise, I can define all the resources, the desired state of my resources in this, and I can apply this desired state. Now VPC is created. What else? Now I'll create a required subnets. I'll create a required subnets. I'll create a required subnets. Now, do you see there is something like AWS subnet also here under this VPC section only? You can see all these resources. AWS Internet Gateway, AWS Internet Gateway is there, AWS route table is there, AWS underscore subnet is there. Can I create a subnet like this? Resource AWS underscore subnet. AWS underscore subnet. Now you can give something like this. You can give, this is a local name. This is just a local name. I can say any name, public subnet 1A. This is local name. This is local name. Now, while creating a subnet, most important thing is VPC ID. Under which VPC you need to create? When you guys manually created a subnet, did you guys selected under which VPC you need to create like that when you manually created also? Yes, but here automation. So if you see there is one argument, if you see there is one argument called VPC ID, there is one argument called VPC ID. Argument references, you can see VPC ID. This is required field. You can, as I already told, you have resource, every resource will have some arguments. There are required arguments, there are optional arguments. This VPC ID is what type of argument? For this resource, for this AWS subnet resource, what type of argument it is? Required argument. Now I can reference. Can I reference this one? Referencing the resource type dot local name dot id. Now for this subnet, this VPC becomes a dependency. Is it like an implicit dependency? Does Terraform will identify, even though I am creating like this, does Terraform will create this one first because we are referencing here? This is called as a implicit dependencies. Now VPC ID, but there are some required field. One more required field. What is the one more required field? CIDR block also. But if I don't give, it will take me all the CIDR range of that VPC. That is not going to work out for me. That is not going to work out for me. That is not going to work out for me. I am going to give CIDR block also. CIDR block. Even though it's optional, I am going to specify something like this. CIDR block for the subnet resource also. For the subnet. Let me tell you CIDR. But I will the VPC CIDR, the subnet CIDR should be subset of VPC CIDR that you already know. I am planning like this. I hope you can understand what is this. I am not explaining again what is CIDR. I am not discussing AWS concept here. I hope you can understand what is this. Okay. Now let me give it tags. Let me give it tags. Tags also important, right? I'll say something, some name, demo. Guys, you can refer something like this also. You can refer something like this also. If you don't want hard code, you can refer something like this also. Dollar within flower bracket demo VPC dot tags, like this also you can refer same tags. Otherwise you can hard code also. This is, we call it as a referencing, right? Otherwise you can say something like this, demo VPC public subnet. Now my requirement in some availability zone I want to mention. Do you have that option also here? While creating also you can select, do you have that option availability zone? Under which availability zone? I don't want to use ID. I don't want to use ID. I can just say availability zone. Availability zone, I will say AP South, AP South 1A, AP South 1A, AP South 1A. And we have some subnet level preferences. If you guys remember, auto assign public IP, yes, sir. Auto assign public IP, yes, sir. Can I use all those options here also? If you see auto assign public IP like that, you can see in the subnets, right? Where is that? Map public IP and launch. The option names is different. The option names is different. The concept is same. Map a public IP and launch. Specify true to indicate that instances launched into this subnet will have a public IP address. The default value is false. But can I use this one also and say yes, map public IP and launch as true, so that that auto assign public IP that becomes true for this subnet based on your requirement. I can say true. Now this is one subnet. Similarly, can I plan some more subnets like this as per my requirement? Some local name, private subnet. This CIDR should be subset of your VPC CIDR. I have already taken first 64, 0 to 60, starting from 0 indicates /26 indicates 64. Since it is starting from 0 till 63, we have already taken. I am starting from 64. Guys, you can use all those whatever that subnet calculators. I am explaining only Terraform. I am not explaining AWS again here. You should be aware about what is VPC, what is subnet, all those things. Now this is my range, and I am breaking this to 4 different pieces. So from 64 to another 26 I am using here, and same availability zone. But this is private subnet. I don't want to map public IP on launch true. That is auto assign public IP. I don't want to enable. Even though I remove, what is the default value? I no need to specify like false. What is the default value of that one as per the documentation? What is the default? False. False. Right? So let me give some tags. Demo VPC private subnet 1A. This is in the same availability zone. Now I will duplicate. I don't want to waste much time here. I don't want to waste much time here. Public subnet 1B, I'll specify in 1B availability zone. I am adding a unique tags here. 1B, 1B, 1B like that. Now the CIDR. CIDR should be unique. So let me take from 128 remaining from here, right? It will be from 128 to another 64, from 190 to another 64 IPs. Now, if I run like this, as is, if I run, VPC will be created, subnets will be created. But is IGW will be created? Is NAT instances will be created? Is the routes will be created like that if I run as is? No. So we can use, yes, Pawan, you can use for each. You can use for each with the map. We'll come to that. Let's understand the concepts first. That's I will next when I'm explaining next, right? I will simplify this one. First, without guys, you need to understand ABC first. You can't write a statements. You can't write a statements. First, you need to learn alphabets. Then you can make it simple, right? So all the best practices you need to follow. That's why we discussed what is for each, right? What is count, right? You can use for each with the map, or you can use for each with your own variables also, complex objects. We will understand all those things. That we will simplify all these things when we go with the variables concept. When we go with variables concept, we will simplify all these things. But understand, this is very, very important. Without knowing ABC, you can't learn statements and pages like that. Now, VPC will be created, subnets will be created, but is IGW will be created, route tables will be created, NAT instances will be created. Now, if I apply this one, no. Now I will create a IGW. I'll create a IGW. You can see there is a documentation, detailed documentation. I have not written a code in upfront. I have not written a code upfront. If I give this code upfront for you guys, you will by heart. You will copy paste and you will by heart without understanding. So I am doing a Terraform development live so that you can understand how to learn, how to work. I am doing live. I am not. I have not written this Terraform configurations outside. I am doing in a live. So let's do this internet gateway. There is something called AWS underscore internet underscore gateway. Let me create an internet gateway. I am creating an internet gateway, something like this. Some local name, demo VPC IGW, and I will refer that VPC ID like this. So the internet gateway will be created, and that internet gateway will be associated with this VPC, right? So demo VPC, whatever you want to give, tags, demo VPC IGW like that. Internet gateway will be created, and this is associated. You can see the documentation. You can see the documentation. This is optional, but if you don't define this, again you need to do this. Again you need to do this. Internet gateway association. Internet gateway association. Again you need to do this. So if you see the VPC ID to create in, see this resource for alternate way to attach internet gateway. There is a one more way. If you don't use this, you can, if you don't use this, what does it mean? It will just create a internet gateway. But is that internet gateway will be associated with that VPC? If I just define like this, no. So they are saying there is one more way. There is one more way. See this one. See this one. They're saying, see this one. Here, I need to do like this. I need to do like this. One more resource, internet gateway attachment. Here, I need to refer. I need to refer the VPC ID, this VPC, whatever I have created, and this internet gateway. this internet gateway ID like this. But instead of doing like this, they simplified. Instead of defining like this, they have simplified here itself. They have simplified here itself. You just define the VPC ID. So this will be automatically taken care. This will be automatically taken care. Then you no need to do this attachment separately if you define like this. If you don't define like this, you need to do this AWS Internet Gateway Attachment Resource type, give some local name. Here VPC ID you are referring and Internet Gateway ID you are referring. So their kind of association is going to happen. If you define like this, you no need to do this one. You need to read the documentation so that you can understand all these concepts. If you by heart step by step, it won't work out. Since I am using like this, I will remove this one. I don't need this. Is everyone clear? This is one way. This is one way. You just create internet gateway. Using this resource, you map internet gateway with your VPC resource. Otherwise, here itself you specify, you don't need this. Is everyone clear on this one? Is everyone clear on this one, what it is doing? Now, we just created internet gateway, but what about routes? What about routes? Do we need to create a routes again? Route table, first of all, route table and routes. Route table and routes. There is a documentation here itself. There is a documentation here itself. AWS route tables. Route tables, right? You have a route table. Route table association, routes like that. There are multiple things. Now I want to create a route table. Route table. Let me select this. I'll create a route table. I'll create a route table where I can define the routes. Where I can define the routes. Guys, again, you need to spend some documentation, right? Spend some time on the documentation. There are various ways. Recently, Terraform introduced like this. Otherwise, earlier you need to do this route, you need to create a separate and association separate like that. But recently, AWS has provider has done lot of changes. Now let me take this. Let me take this. I am going to create a resource AWS route table. Route table is different. Route is different. Route table. AWS route table. Route table. I will give something like this. Something demo VPC public route. Something local name. Now here it is going to take some arguments. VPC ID, for which VPC you want to create. Guys, if you copy paste as is, it will not work. You need to understand what is this, what is this. This is local name they just referred. But if I run as is, do you think this will work? This is the local name for the AWS VPC I have used here? No. What is the name? Demo VPC. Demo VPC. This is the VPC. Now you can define the routes. Earlier there was different options. You need to read this documentation. Note on route tables and routes, Terraform currently provides both standalone route resources and a route table resource with routes defined inline. What do you mean by standalone? Earlier there is a separate way to do this. You can create a route first. You can create a route like this. Route table ID, CIDR, like this you used to define. But now they have defined, they are giving inline. They are giving inline in the sense in the same, in the route table itself, you can do something like this. Now here I can say route for this route table. I will say 0.0.0.0.0/0. This one is internet gateway dot this local name dot ID. We are defining a route. We are defining a route in that route table. Now tags, whatever tags you want to give, demo VPC public route like that you can give. Route you have defined. But earlier, route was different, route table was different like that. Now the route inline, you can define inline like this. Route CIDR block, gateway ID, that gateway ID is this one. Now we created a route table, but what about association? Is this route table is associated with your subnets which you want to make public? So that one you need to do again. That one you need to do again. That one you need to do again using one more resource. What type of resource type? Route table association. There is something called AWS route table association. So you do something like this. You do something like this. You do something like this. Something demo VPC, some local name. Demo VPC, IGW, RT, association, something you can give anything. This is local name only, right? This is local name only. Demo VPC, IGW, route table association, something. Now you need to define the subnet IDs. You need to define the subnet IDs, the subnet ID and route table ID. You need to define the subnet IDs and route table IDs. Now this route table, can I refer this route table here? AWS route table dot this local name dot ID like this. Now subnet ID. You need to refer the subnet ID. They are giving all the options, argument references, subnet ID, right? Route table ID. So you need to define all these things, subnet ID, route table ID like that. You need to define. Now you can define something like this, route table association, route table association. Now this subnet public, whatever you want to make public, right? So subnet dot that ID like this, and you are going to create two resources. You are going to create two resources. One more public subnet. One more subnet you want to make it public, right? This one, public subnet 1B, public subnet 1B. That ID. You are doing two things. You are associating the route table with this public subnet of 1A, public subnet of 1B. Now, what else needs to be created as per this architecture now? As per this architecture now, what else? I created a VPC, subnets, a route table for public subnets, private subnets also there. Now what is left as per this requirement? The NAT instances. The NAT instances, the NAT instances and the association for that NAT instance. The association for that NAT instance, right? Now you can see, as I already told, NAT instances depends on what? NAT instance is expecting what? If you guys created a NAT instance, does NAT instance requires what? Elastic IP, if you guys remember, right? Now, if you see, there is something called NAT gateway. You see, there is something called NAT gateway. Now I can create a NAT gateway. I can create a NAT gateway. NAT gateway. I can create a NAT gateway, something like this. I can create a NAT gateway, something like this. Now you can use this explicit dependency. You can use this explicit dependency just to make sure, to ensure proper ordering. To ensure proper ordering, it is recommended to add an explicit dependency on the internet gateway for VPC, because this is required. Internet gateway is required for this NAT like that. So to ensure the proper ordering, is this called as an explicit dependency now? Is it called as an explicit dependency now? Just to make sure the proper ordering is done now. Now you can specify that IGW. Where is that IGW? Guys, names you have to be careful, okay? Now I am doing explicit dependency, NAT instance. And you need to create a NAT instance. You need to create a NAT instance. You need to create a NAT instance in some subnet. Now, can I create? I will go with only one subnet. If required, you can create two NAT instances also. If required, you can create two NAT instances or one NAT instance. Okay, that is fine. Let me create two NAT gateways. That is fine. And understand here, don't copy paste as is. I'm going to create a NAT gateway, demo VPC, some local name, NAT gateway, just some name, NAT 1A. In 1A availability zone, in public subnet I will do. In 1A availability zone, public subnet I will do. I will reference all these names, okay? Now here, under which subnet this NAT instance has to be created, I am specifying in this subnet. Now, allocation ID is elastic IP. You need to get a elastic IP first. How to get elastic IP? There is a one more elastic IP resource. There is a one more elastic IP resource. Allocation ID is like your elastic IP. Your elastic IP. It is optional. The allocation ID of elastic IP address, it is optional, but required either this one or this one. Connectivity type. If this is optional, in case you have not specified these two. This is optional in case you specified this one. Suppose you said a connection. Suppose you specified a connection type is public. This is required. If you specified connection type is public, this allocation ID is required. And even though we are not specifying connectivity type, what is the default value? Even though we are not specifying the connectivity type, what is the default value? Public. So since this is public, is it required? The elastic, that allocation ID is required now? Yes. So how you can do this? There is a one more resource, AWS underscore EIP, elastic IP. So I can give some name. This elastic IP. You can go to this and search AWS underscore EIP. This is one type of resource, elastic IP. AWS underscore EIP, which comes under networking only or EC2. Let me search. Just to make search simple, I am searching like this. Okay, let me search here. Let me search to make the thing simple. Use something like this. This EIP, elastic IP. Now you can create elastic IP also. You can create elastic IP like this. Resource EIP, elastic IP like that. Resource EIP indicates elastic IP like that. Now you can specify the various options for this elastic IP. Provides an elastic IP address. EIP may require IGW exist prior to association. Use depends on. They are saying, right, elastic IP address may require IGW to exist before association. Use depends on to set the explicit dependency. That's what they are saying. And don't use network interface to associate elastic IP with load balancer, NAT gateway like that. They're saying you can use allocation ID. They're saying all the options here. If you want to associate that elastic IP with this NAT gateway, they're saying use allocation ID like that. And they're saying various option. So various options. Now I am going to create EIP, elastic IP. I'm going to create elastic IP, resource elastic IP, something like this. Resource elastic IP, and I'm going to give some name, EIP for NAT gate, something, EIP elastic IP 1, something like this. Now here I will specify some options. I will specify some options like if required, I can just specify only this also, VPC tags. If required, I can give a tags also, tags for this elastic IP, tags for this elastic IP. Name, I'm saying elastic IP. NAT gateway, something you can use any tags. Now, even though you don't specify, some values are Boolean, like namespace value, this is true like that. Now this elastic IP, I can use here, EIP dot elastic IP1 dot ID, like this. These are the tags for NAT gateway. These are the tags for NAT gateway. These are the tags for NAT gateway. They are saying depends on this one. So this is depends on this one. It will ensure proper ordering again. Now tags, I can say NAT gateway, NAT gateway 1A, 1A subnet like that, 1A availability zone like that. If required, in two different subnets, I need to have this. Can I repeat this one more time? In another subnet also, I need a NAT gateway. Can I repeat these two one more time with the different names and IDs? Different names and IDs, yes. Now I'll say EIP 2. We told the local name should be unique. The combination of resource type and local name should be unique. That's what we told, right? Now this NAT gateway for 1B availability zone, and I am going to refer this one here, and here I am going to refer another public subnet, that 1B public subnet, the 1B public subnet local name, the another public subnet local name, that ID, NAT gateway 1B. Now I will get two different NAT instances with their own elastic IP. With their own elastic IP, two different NAT gateways will be there. But what is last? What is left? The last one. We are getting NAT gateways, but what is left? Do we need to create an association that routes? Do we need to create that association that routes? Yes. So let me do that. So let me do that. I'm going to create resource AWS in underscore route table. I'll create a route table, route table, route table, and I will give something like this, private demo VPC, something, some local name, demo VPC. You can make things simple also. You can just say private route table 1, private route table 2 also like that. Otherwise, you can give anything. You can give something like this also, private route table 1A. For 1A availability zone, you are creating something like this route table. Here in this route table, again, you can define the routes. You can define the routes the way I have defined the routes here. I can define the routes and VPC ID. You need to define the VPC ID. This is the V for this. Under this VPC, I am creating routes. Now I will use NAT route here. I will use NAT route here. So I will use NAT route here, something like this. I will use NAT route here, something like this. Something like this, right? Now here, I am going to associate differently. Here I am going to associate differently. You see the table. You see the table. I mean to say the argument for route table, how you can use. You can search like this also. You can search like this also to get the better results. Route table. Here you have gateway ID, NAT gateway ID, something like this. Gateway ID and NAT gateway ID. So there are two important attributes. Route table resource can be created with NAT gateway ID like that. Now, if required, you can use something like this. The arguments, there is gateway ID, NAT gateway ID. Now, this is for internet gateway, but for now I want to associate this route table with NAT gateway. Can I use NAT gateway ID instead of gateway ID like this? Gateway ID, and I am going to refer this NAT gateway. This NAT gateway, whatever has been created in 1A, AWS NAT gateway, which is created in 1A dot ID. This is NAT gateway. This is NAT gateway. So I am saying demo VPC private tags private route 1A. Now we just define the route, but still something is still missing. Something is still missing. What is missing? We created a route table with routes. What we need to do? Association. Like this. Like this I can associate. Like this I can associate the subnets. Route table association, demo VPC. You can give something. NAT association 1A, something, some unique. Now here I'll say private subnet. I am going to associate this route table with the private subnet, because this is a NAT gateway, right? NAT gateway association. I'll say private subnet 1A. Now similarly I'll create one more route table. Similarly, I'll create one more route table and its association. One more route table and its association for 1B. I'll say 1B. This is 1B. One more NAT gateway. I am associating the route. This is for 1B. And here I am associating that 1B private subnet with this 1B NAT instance. This route table. With this 1B route table. Now, if I use this infrastructure as a code, now if you see in the live I have written 180 lines of code. But if you understand the concept, is Terraform is easy. If you know what is resource block, what is arguments, what is provider, if you know AWS concept only, then it is easy. Without knowing AWS, can you write anything like this? No. Now this is my Terraform configuration. Now if I go to my AWS cloud, let me go to VPC in Mumbai region. I have some VPCs already, 2 VPCs, but they have their own CIDR. Two VPCs are there. There are some subnets are there. This is existing one. Now let me use this Terraform code. Let me go to command line. Let me go to that folder, cd vpc demo. First and foremost thing, what you are going to do, you need to initialize Terraform init. It is going to initialize the required plugins. Now, as I already told, required version, the Terraform CLI version, I used this operator 1.2.0. Is it saying it is not the Terraform configuration does not support this one because we are using CLI this version. We already told just for validation. Now let me make it 1.0 or 1.30 also like that, based on your requirement. So let me do the Terraform init. Now there is some duplicate association. Somewhere I have forgot to do this. In line number 101. There is, I forgot. So association. So this is for 1A. This is for 1A. This is for 1B. Unique names, local names should be there. So here the duplicate of local names, that's what it is complaining. So let me do the Terraform init, initialization. Now it is downloading required provider. AWS provider. Now if required, optional, can you validate your Terraform configurations are proper or not? What command you can use? Terraform validate command. Terraform validate command. Terraform validate. Validate command. If everything is fine, it will say okay. Now if you want to format, what you can use, because while writing I have not used some proper format like that. Without format also you can proceed. You can use Terraform FMT. Terraform FMT. Now everything is formatted properly. Now optionally you can say Terraform plan. Now the desired state with current state. Is there any resources in the real infrastructure as of now? Whatever resources I have defined in this configuration, is these resources are there in your actual real infrastructure, that in that real infrastructure? For the first time we are running, there is no resources, there is no state. We already discussed all those things. I don't want to get into it. Now it is saying these many resources has to be created. These many resources has to be created. Now there is some problem while copy pasted. I have missed something. So here in this line number 60, I just provided something like this, but I have not provided an ID. I have not provided ID. Line number 160 and 169. If you see dot ID, right? That subnet IDs I need to refer. That subnet IDs I need to refer. I just given the local names, but not IDs. That's why it is complaining. Let me say Terraform plan. Let me say Terraform plan. Now I fixed that problem. Now again there are some issues. What it is saying, NAT gateway ID is required. NAT gateway ID is required. Here also I have done some mistakes. Okay. Here also I have done some mistake. NAT gateway ID. NAT gateway ID. NAT gateway ID for 1 year. 1 second. I created a NAT gateway in the public subnet with EIP1, EIP2, NAT gateway in 1B public subnet, in 1B public subnet. Then private route table in this VPC with this CIDR, with this, and association. Private subnet is associated with this route table. One more route table. Here, the ID, you need to properly refer this IDs. So this is where we are missing the IDs while copy pasting in a hurry. Okay. Now let me do the Terraform plan. Now it is going to say these many resources. How many resources is going to be created if I apply now? What resources? You can check the detail. It is going to say, it is saying elastic IP will be created like this, and it is saying internet gateway will be created, NAT gateway, two NAT gates will be created, route tables, all these things. Now let me say Terraform apply hyphen auto approve auto approve. Now you see the Terraform is going to compare your desired state with current state, and it is going to create the resources which is there in the configuration, which is not there in the actual infrastructure. If there are some resources which is there in the configuration and real infrastructure also, but there is some differences, it will update that resource. We discussed that resource behavior. Now everything is getting created. Everything is getting created. Now if you have a Terraform code like this, can we automate the infrastructure provisioning? Can we create a consistent environments? Can we reuse this code? How many times you want to run, destroy, update your infrastructure? Yes. Now it will take some time. If you go to your cloud, now, let me go to VPC. Let me go to VPC. Can I see this VPC, demo VPC with this CIDR range, with all these options, DNS names enabled, DNS resolution enabled. And if I go to subnets, do I have these many subnets for that VPC? You can filter with this VPC ID also. Based on the VPC ID also, you can filter VPC, this VPC ID. This VPC ID. So do you see 4 subnets got created like this? And 4 subnets got created for that VPC using the CIDR. And there are route tables. Right? There are route tables are getting created. They are getting created. Still they are getting created because this is still in progress. Let's wait. I'll come to this route. But if you see this IGW, do I have IGW created for that VPC? IGW. And if I go to NAT instances, NAT gateways, can I see 2 NAT gateways? One is in 1A availability zone. Another one is in 1B availability zone, like that. One is in 1A availability zone in this subnet. Another one is in another availability zone, like that. And if I go to route tables, now can you see all these routes? The default route is there. Public route, demo VPC public route. There is a route to the internet gateway. And these two subnets are associated. And there is 2 private route tables. In one private route table, there is an association with the one NAT gateway, and only one private subnet is associated with this route table, where we have a route to this NAT. And there is one more route table for another private subnet, where there is association with another NAT gateway. Now my infrastructure is provisioned as per the given requirement. We learned bits and pieces. I hope today you understood how we will use Terraform in real projects, real applications. Is everyone clear what we have done using this Terraform, using all these things? Now, can you guys give a try? I'll not share this code for today. Can you guys give a try as per this requirement? Can you guys try the Terraform code and provision the VPC and required components like this? I'll not share this code for today. Let's try. I have developed everything in the live only, right? I have developed everything in the live only. I have not developed something offline here. Try to write a Terraform code for this requirement. This is my requirement. Right? So this is my requirement. There are 2 NAT gateways. This private subnet is associated with this NAT gateway. In this route table, is associated with this private subnet, this NAT instance. Now there is a public route table. IGW. So these two are associated here. So try to do this as an assignment. I'll continue tomorrow, guys. Thank you. I'll continue tomorrow.
Sir, tomorrow is a Holi, so do we have?
I'm planning to take a session. If you need a time for doing this assignment, I can give holiday, but I'm fine. I can take sessions because anyhow Saturday I'm not taking a session.
Okay.
So, do you need holiday, guys, tomorrow? I can let people only confirm. If you guys need holiday, how many of you raise holiday need holiday tomorrow? Say yes. Votes. I'll go with votes. Balaji is saying yes, holiday. What about others? Who votes more? Based on that, we will decide. No, need to practice, Balaji. Vijay Lakshmi is saying yes. Okay, 2 votes for yes. Pawan is saying I am okay with anything, then I am considering okay, 50-50. Okay, anyhow, today we have discussed so many things. Let's take tomorrow as a holiday. I'll take session on Saturday. I'll compensate. I'll not leave. Okay, I'll take this Saturday as session because I'm giving holiday tomorrow. Is that fine? Okay. So try to practice. Do this assignment. I'm not sharing anything today. I'm not sharing anything today. This code I am not sharing. I want you to do this so that you can work on Terraform. I want you to make a Terraform professionals. So that's why I am explaining step by step like this. So everyone do this assignment. I'll continue on next session. Recording I will share. Recording I'll share. No need to worry. Thank you guys. I'll continue Wednesday. Okay. Tomorrow no session.